Millionaire saved by girl's scream. Your plane's been sabotaged. The next day he sets out to find her. She came running out of the cargo zone like a ghost on fire, tearing through the thick silence of the tarmac with a scream that pierced every heart within earshot. Don't get on that plane. The sound was raw, urgent, so full of desperation that Gael Montenegro froze mid-step, one foot still hovering above the first stair of the boarding ladder. The girl, maybe 8 years old, had a face smudged with soot, torn clothes and eyes that screamed what her mouth couldn't. The heat warped the air around them, shimmering like the ground itself was about to collapse. The sharp scent of jet fuel clung to the wind, bitter, too strong. Gael, phone still pressed to his ear on a billion-dollar call about mergers in Catalonia, nearly ignored it. Nearly. Then the pilot rushed down from the cockpit, muttering something about a strange smell in the fuel tank, and something inside Gael broke. It was a snap, a primal instinct honed by decades surviving corporate warfare. Something was wrong. Get everyone off, now, he ordered. The pilot hesitated for half a second and obeyed. The co-pilot was already shutting systems down when the sky split open in orange. The explosion hurled Gael backwards like paper in a hurricane. The blast cracked the world in two, fire, metal, glass. It all blurred into seconds of pure terror. He only saw the light swallowing the jet whole, like the future he'd crafted with such precision had just gone up in flames before his eyes. When he came to, the jet was gone. Only a smoking crater remained, where it had been readying for takeoff. To Madrid. Gael pulled himself up, arms bleeding from invisible cuts, his imported linen suit now a blackened rag. His heart pounded as his eyes scanned what his mind couldn't comprehend. Smoke danced like ghosts in the air. The girl. She saved him, but she was gone. He stumbled through the smoke, calling for her, shouting to anyone who might have seen her. Firefighters grabbed him, their eyes wide with shock as the truth sank in. You should be dead, Mr. Montenegro, one whispered, and maybe he would have been, if not for the voice of a child cutting through concrete and logic. In the makeshift infirmary at the airport, as doctors checked his vitals, a security agent approached. There's no footage of any child on the runway, no record of entry. She doesn't exist in the system. Gael shut his eyes. His head throbbed, but her face was sharp in his mind like a fresh scar, dirty, shaking. Her palm stretched toward the plane. She knew. She'd seen something. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A deep voice with a thick Castilian accent said, "You were supposed to die today." She ruined everything. Gael couldn't speak. The call ended with a cold click. It hadn't been an accident, it was a message. And the girl, a living witness. The police tried to contain the story, but the name Montenegro pulled media attention. Like honey draws bees, local papers buzzed with theories: terrorist plot, corporate sabotage, political hit job. None of them mentioned the girl. Gael launched his own investigation. Every inch of airport security footage reviewed, every lead chased. Nothing. No girl. No trace. But there was one small detail even the experts missed. A tiny red ribbon tied discreetly on the lower handrail of the boarding stairs. Grease-stained, partially scorched by the blast, but the knot still intact. It was a child's ribbon. Simple. Innocent. And Gael recognized it instantly. He'd seen it before. At his sister's graveyard 27 years ago. The memory hit like a second explosion. The cemetery in Zaragoza, the silent funeral, the closed casket, the red ribbon he'd tied to a wooden cross marking her grave before the headstone arrived. Back then, he was just a 17-year-old boy, fists clenched in grief. Now a grown man, and the ribbon had returned like a question without a face. Who was that girl? And more haunting still, what did she have to do with the past Gael buried in silence and fire? The silence in his hotel room felt like glass on the edge of shattering. Gael stared at the red ribbon laid out on the table like it was a message from the dead. No street noise, no movement outside. Just that ribbon, still untouched, like a ghost's note left behind. He hadn't slept in 32 hours. And it wasn't because of the explosion. It was the ribbon that unstrung him. 27 years ago, he was on the ground too, kneeling in front of something that made no sense. His sister Isabella's coffin had been shut in a hurry. No one dared open it. They'd told him her face had been disfigured in the accident. But Gail remembered the things no one spoke about. The anonymous phone call the day before, the feeling of being followed, and the ribbon, that red ribbon. She wore it in her hair since she was little. At the funeral, he took an identical one from his pocket and tied it to the small wooden crucifix they'd placed before the permanent headstone. Now, over 2 decades later, the same knot, same fabric, same cut of ribbon had shown up in the wreckage. It wasn't coincidence. It was a calling. He returned to the blast site before sunrise, without alerting anyone. The airport still smelled of metal and smoke. The crater had been covered with military tarps, but Gail had access few did. He passed barriers, nodded at security chiefs, ignored warnings. He wanted to be where he fell, to feel the ground, as if he could sense something the forensics team had missed. That's when he found it. Not the girl. Something stranger. A second ribbon, tied inside the boarding stairs, almost burned away but still red, still alive. "Mr. Montenegro, it's not safe here without protective gear," a national police agent warned. Gael ignored him. He didn't want protection. He wanted memory, and the memory came. It was a sweltering summer day when Isabella disappeared. Gael was in Madrid competing in an academic tournament. His mother called, sobbing. Isabella never made it home from school. Hours later, they found her belongings in an alley in the Gothic quarter. Nothing else. No signs. No witnesses. For weeks, he and his friends scoured every street. 22 days later came the news of a charred body in a burnt-out car. Only fragments remained. They buried what was left without answers. But Gail always knew. Something about it never added up. And now someone had chosen to remind him. With fire, with a child, and a red ribbon. The next night, he demanded the old case files, pulled strings, spent money, dug up the past buried under weak conclusions and forgotten reports, and there, buried in the 1998 inquest, was a detail he had never noticed, an anonymous fax, a single handwritten line, sent 2 days after Isabella's funeral. She saw what she wasn't supposed to. Now it's too late. No follow-up, no investigation. The fax had been filed as a prank, but now it felt like a missed warning. And then the phone rang. Gail was alone reviewing the documents in his hotel room. Unknown number. The same cold, gravelly voice. "She's alive." He couldn't answer. His throat went dry. "You buried the wrong body." The ribbon was the clue. Click. The line went dead. Dead. This time Gail didn't freeze. He called an old contact in Barcelona, a hacker who owed him. He asked for access to private airport cameras from the 2 days leading up to the explosion. He wanted to see where the girl had come from, how she had gone unnoticed. Hours later, the footage came in. From the grainy zoom of a side security camera, a child's silhouette emerged behind a cargo van. Just for a few seconds, but enough to capture her face. It was her, the girl from the explosion, and next to her, half hidden in the shadows, a man. Someone Gail knew, someone who'd been dead for 10 years. The frozen frame looked like it had been ripped straight out of a nightmare. The resolution was poor, but the jawline, the way he walked, the slight tilt of his head to the right. Every part of Gail screamed a name he thought he'd never hear again, Julian Ortega. Except Julian was dead. Not metaphorically, literally. Gail had been at the funeral, had watched the casket sealed, thrown the first handful of dirt. Years earlier, his former business partner, and once his best friend, was found in the remains of a burnt-out car outside Seville. Too much of a coincidence. But there he was, or someone so identical it was impossible to ignore. Gail pulled away from the screen like it had shocked him. His stomach turned, not from disgust, but from the sheer weight of truth, too heavy to process. The hotel, with its polished glass and artificial cedar scent, suddenly felt suffocating. He had to get out, had to walk, had to remember who he was before the world began collapsing in patterns. Julian and Isabella, 2 names from opposite ends of his life. One, a brother in business, a partner in triumphs and betrayals. The other, the last piece of innocence from childhood. He'd never connected them, never imagined they could belong to the same story. But now, there they were, together, same frame, same day. Night fell over Barcelona like a sheet of lead. Gael wandered the Ramblas like a man drunk without a drop of alcohol in his blood. Each step felt like it sank deeper into memory rather than pavement. He remembered Julian at college parties, remembered bringing him into the corporate world. He also remembered the day he had to push him out after discovering falsified documents and rerouted funds. But he never turned him in, out of loyalty or fear of what he'd find if he dug deeper. Maybe that was the mistake. In the old marketplace plaza, he sat on a bench and called someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Carmen, Julian's ex-fiancée. Her voice was tight, guarded, but still alive. "It's been years since anyone said that name to me, Gael," she said after a long pause. He didn't waste time. He asked if there was any chance Julian was still alive. "No," she said firmly. But what came next broke him. The only doubt I ever had was that the body in the car was never positively identified. It was too burned. They used his documents in the glove box to say it was him. Silence. And one more thing. Carmen hesitated. A few days before the accident, Julian was acting strange, obsessed with something. He kept saying, "The past is coming back," and "Ivan Isabella wouldn't understand what I did for her." The words hit Gael like a steel hook to the chest. Isabella. Again. Julian had talked about her. Why? Back at the hotel, the pieces started spinning wildly. If Julian was alive, if the girl who saved him knew him, then maybe his sister's death wasn't an accident. Maybe it was never an accident at all. Then came the nightmare. Gael collapsed into sleep from sheer exhaustion, his body forcing his brain to shut down. But the dream felt more real than waking life. He was in his parents' old home in Zaragoza. His sister's room was open, the bed made. A red ribbon lay on her pillow. He walked to the window and outside saw Julian holding the little girl's hand. They were staring back at him, as if he was the outsider, as if he was the last to know. He woke up sweating, screaming. On the nightstand beside him sat the thing that finally broke him. A plain envelope. No return address. Inside, a printed photo. Isabella. Alive. Older than when she died, but unmistakably her. In the background, slightly blurred, someone was watching her. Julian. Gael collapsed to his knees. His sister hadn't died, and someone wanted him to know it. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit like if this story has you on the edge of your seat. Morning came without color. The sky over Barcelona looked like concrete, and Gael carried the photo of his sister as if it were a ticking bomb in his chest. The image was too clear to be fake. Isabella, older but unmistakable. Same face, same scar above her left brow, from a bike accident when she was 9, and yet she was supposed to be dead. Or maybe he thought she never was. He called the private investigator he had hired days earlier, Gustavo Alvarez, and told him to come immediately. When the man arrived, coffee and files in hand. Gael tossed the photo onto the table. "Think it's doctored?" Gustavo didn't answer right away. He took out a magnifying lens, examined the edges, the paper grain, the resolution. "If it's fake, it's the best I've ever seen. And that woman, she matches someone we caught on a surveillance video in Salamanca 3 months ago. Same face, same movement, tucking her hair with her left hand. We were already monitoring her as a potential long-term missing person. Now we have a match." Gael felt the ground shift beneath him. Salamanca, less than 60 miles from where Isabella was supposedly buried. "Was she alone?" he asked, barely containing the tremble in his voice. "No, with a child and a man. Matches the description of the one you showed me yesterday. Julian." Gael's throat closed. The city, the streets, the sounds of the world grew distant, muffled. He was trapped in a tunnel narrowing by the second. Every answer led to 3 new questions. And now there was one unbearable truth. He had buried the wrong body, and worse, someone let him. "I want to go there," he said, voice firm. "Gael, listen." Gustavo hesitated, rubbed the back of his neck. "Someone is leaving you a very specific trail. This isn't random, this is orchestrated. Exactly, which is why I'm going. I want to know why." Hours later, they were on the road, crossing the Castilian plains under a heavy sky. The wind slammed against the car windows as if trying to stop them. Gael didn't speak. He just stared out the window. Inside, the past rewrote itself violently. The funeral, the grief, the falling out with his mother, all built on a lie. They stopped in a small village where the woman from the photo had supposedly been seen. A place forgotten by time. Stone streets, shuttered windows, no children playing, no radios, no scent of bread. Something there felt sealed shut. In a nearly empty cafe, the owner recognized them. "You're looking for the woman with the blue scarf?" he asked in a low voice. Gael nodded. "She used to come here sometimes, always quiet, with the girl and a man. They didn't talk to anyone but her. She had sad eyes, like she was waiting for someone who was never coming." Gael wanted to ask more, but the man motioned for silence. "Don't come back here. At night. It's not safe." The warning dropped like lead. "Why not?" The cafe owner stared at him. "Because they come back too. As they left the village, the car was followed. Gael saw it in the rearview mirror, a dark SUV, headlights off. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message. He told Gustavo to speed up, cutting through back roads. When they looked again, the car was gone. But the warning was loud and clear. They knew where he was, and they knew he was getting too close. By nightfall, they arrived in Salamanca. They checked discreetly into an old hotel with floors that creaked under every step. At reception, no one recognized the woman in the photo. But when Gael accidentally dropped the image on the counter, a housekeeper with hollow eyes froze. "I know her," she said, "but the name she uses isn't Isabella. It's Irene." Gael said nothing. Irene. A new name for an old story. The woman looked around, leaned closer and whispered something that sent a chill down his spine. "She's not hiding. She's being kept. She's being kept." The housekeeper's words echoed through Gael's mind like they'd been spoken. Then an empty cathedral. Where, by whom, and why, but she said no more. She backed away quickly, eyes lowered, as if she'd already said too much. Gustavo tried to follow her down the hallways, but she vanished. Gael stayed up all night, staring at the photo of his sister, or of Irene, holding the child's hand. The girl looked directly into the camera, as if she knew what was coming, as if she was trying to warn him. The next morning, Gustavo arrived with chilling news. "I found the address where they've been staying. A house on the outskirts near an old abandoned asylum outside Salamanca. Looks deserted, but there are utility bills being paid under the name Juan Ortega." Gael's blood went cold. Juan Ortega, Julian's father, a man who'd disappeared years ago, suspected of money laundering, political corruption, and a still unsolved arson, the same fire that supposedly killed his own son. "They're alive," Gael muttered. "All of them. And they're connected." They drove out in a rented car, keeping a low profile. The road to the house was narrow, flanked by dried pines and broken power poles. As the building appeared in the distance, it felt like the air itself held its breath. An old structure, boarded windows, rusted gates, absolute silence, but there were signs of life. A curtain shifted, a lens glinted, a faint sound of running water. "We need backup," Gustavo said, hand on his phone. "If she's alive and being kept, we don't have time for red tape." Gael jumped the gate without waiting. He walked cautiously, heart pounding against his ribs. Every step on the gravel was a note of dread. At the door he heard something. Music. Faint. From inside. An old piano. Simple, repetitive notes. A melody he recognized immediately. The same tune Isabella used to play as a child. The one that used to drift through the walls on nights she couldn't sleep. "Isabella," he whispered. He pushed the door unlocked. The wood creaked like a warning. Inside the house was a maze of furniture under sheets, mildew in the air, and paintings turned against the walls. But the music was clear. Real. He followed the sound to a room in the back, and stopped cold. There she was, facing away from him, sitting at a worn piano, hair tied with a red ribbon, the same color. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Isabella. The word came out like breath. She stopped playing, but didn't turn around. Leave, Gael. It was. Her voice, but it carried exhaustion and fear. You're alive, I shouldn't be. Before he could move closer, a side door burst open. 2 armed men stepped in, faces covered. Out, now, one shouted. Gustavo appeared at the front entrance, gun drawn, but before he could react, a third man struck him from behind. Gael lunged toward his sister, but was grabbed, held down. What do you want? He shouted, struggling. And then from the top of the stairs came Julian, older, grey hair, but unmistakable. The real question, Gael, is what you want to do with the truth. The world spun. His former friend, presumed dead, stood alive, beside his missing sister. You lied. All these years. Julian gave a faint smile. But there was no joy in it, only pain. I saved her from you, from all of us. Saved her from what? You don't know, Gael, but your family did things Isabella could never have lived with. She tried to speak out. They silenced her, hid her, and faked the rest. Isabella rose, finally turned to him, tears in her eyes. I saw what they did. I can't go back. Who? Gael asked, desperate. Who is they? But she didn't answer. And then the girl appeared, standing behind Isabella, the same girl who'd saved him at the airport. She looked at Gael and said, He's not ready to know yet. Gael said nothing. He couldn't. Her words hit like a sentence handed down from some place beyond reason. Not ready to know yet. What did that mean? What more was buried in this labyrinth of silence and lies? He felt trapped, surrounded by faces he knew and no longer recognized. Isabella held the girl's hand firmly. There was no hesitation, but there was pain. As if holding that hand was an act of resistance. She wasn't crying, but her eyes said it all. Years of guilt and a decision. Gael tried to move again, but the guards restrained him. Julian descended the stairs slowly, like every step was part of a ritual he'd been preparing for years. You were always blind, Gael, Julian said, voice low and bitter. You thought you could control everything. That money bought truth. But some things don't die in contracts. You betrayed me, betrayed her. You faked your death. Gael's voice trembled with rage and disbelief. I saved her. You have no idea what your family buried. Gael looked to Isabella, searching for denial. A nod. Anything to ground him. She lowered her eyes, and that hurt worse than any bullet. Tell me the truth. All of it. Now. Silence. Julian stepped forward, locked eyes with him. Your father ran a Black Ops program in the 90s. Project Aurora. Secret medical experiments on orphaned children under the cover of a health foundation. Isabella found out. Tried to go public. Instead, they drugged her, disappeared her, and staged her death. Gael staggered backward. This couldn't be real. His father? The man who taught him business and who preached honor, running human experiments. You're lying. He died protecting the secret. But I was part of it, Gael. For a while. Until I saw the truth. Isabella and I rebelled, so they erased us. But I got her out. We faked the deaths. We've been living in the dark ever since, guarding the only living witness to that hell. He looked at the girl, her daughter. The floor dropped out from under Gael. What? Isabella lifted her eyes. Her voice was soft, broken. She was born 9 months later, in a basement, in silence. No birth record. And since then, we've been running, from those who still want to erase the truth. Why now? Gael asked, breathless. Why come? Out now, Julian's voice darkened. Because they've returned, Gael, and this time they're coming for everyone. The airport explosion was just the beginning. Gael's body was shaking. His hands tingled. He didn't know who he was anymore, as if any of this was real. If the woman at the piano was truly his sister, or just a ghost born from pain and guilt. But one truth stood above everything else. She was alive, And there was a little girl who had saved his life, and even though she'd never spoken to him before. "Why did you save me?" he asked. The girl let go of her mother's hand and took a step forward. There was something too deep in her eyes for a child. "Because you're my uncle." The words dropped like a stone into a still lake. Time stopped. A sob rose in Gale's throat, but it didn't come through his eyes. It rose through his whole body, his soul. Everything inside him collapsed. Every meeting, every figure, every corporate victory now felt like a detour from what really mattered. A sister torn away. A niece hidden, and his blood, now tangled in a guilt he didn't even know he carried. He fell to his knees. "What do I do now?" Julian stepped closer. "Now, you choose. You go back to your world and forget everything you've seen, or you help protect what's left of the truth." Gale looked at Isabella. She was still there, more alive than ever, but marked and by things no one could see. And the girl, now he understood. What was in her eyes wasn't fear, it was strength, the kind born between lies, but determined not to live inside them. He took a deep breath, for the first time in years, without control. "Show me where it all began." Julian nodded. "Then get ready, Montenegro. Because what comes next, no one walks away from whole." The road to the original Aurora facility cut through the Spanish countryside like an open wound. The car moved in silence, its headlights illuminating, only fragments of a night that refused to end. In the front seat, Julian drove with eyes locked ahead, like each curve held the weight of a memory. Gail sat in the back, next to the girl he now knew as his niece. Her name was Luna, and until that moment, the sound of her name had never existed for him. Luna stared out the window with an eerie calm. She was a child, but it felt like she'd survived things most adults couldn't bear. Twice, Gale tried to speak to her. Twice, she just gave a quiet smile. Not from fear, but something deeper, as if telling him, "You're not ready yet." He held the second photo of Isabella, the one from the envelope. The same woman from the piano, but her expression was different in this one. Less pain, more hope, as if, at some point in the last years, she had truly believed things could change. And for a second, Gale wondered, was his absence the seed of all this silence? The car stopped in front of a stone and iron building, overgrown and abandoned. The old sanatorium was a sleeping monster, tall, no visible windows, walls coated in moss and silence. Gale stepped out. The air here felt heavier. There was something in this place that drained the life from everything around it. "Even the birds avoided landing. This is where it started?" he asked. Julian nodded. "The first testing site. Kids brought in under the excuse of treating hyperactivity and cognitive disorders. But what they did was something else. Electrochemical stimulation, emotional programming, memory conditioning. They thought they could create future leaders without trauma. All they made were ghosts." Gale's stomach turned. "And Isabella?" "She found out when she was 13, started hearing things, screams from the basement. One of the boys tried to escape. She helped him. After that, she disappeared for weeks. When she came back, she didn't speak, but she wrote everything, a whole journal." "Where is it?" "First thing she hid after we ran. And the last thing that can still change everything." Gale wiped his face. The wind was sharp and cold. Suddenly Luna reached for his hand, no warning. Just a small, steady grip. For the first time she spoke to him, eyes locked on his. "Mom always said you weren't like them. That one day you'd understand. You just had to see it for yourself." The words wrecked him. They walked toward a side entrance. The main door was locked, but Julian knew a section of the fence that had collapsed. They entered through a long hallway, humid, heavy, reeking, of whetstone and rotting time. Old posters and motivational slogans still clung to the walls. Rehabilitation is rebirth. Every mind can be reprogrammed. Now they sounded like threats. They reached a lower wing. Julian pulled out a flashlight. The stairs groaned under their steps. Their footsteps were the only sound until they reached a steel door. It's rusted, plate read, room 3B behind it, Isabella's personal archive, where everything had been documented, sealed and hidden. "This is where she wrote it all," Julianne said. "After she escaped, they locked it. No one's been in since." Gail placed his hand on the door. The cold metal pulled at his memories. He remembered the smell of her hair when they played hide-and-seek as kids, her laugh when she fell off, her bike. But most of all, he remembered leaving her alone in that world, not asking questions, accepting the funeral, never demanding to see the body. He pushed the door open. It gave way with a sharp groan. Inside, stacks of notebooks, dusty. Boxes and a central desk. Tied to the drawer handle was a red ribbon. The same ribbon. Gail stepped closer. Opened the drawer. There it was. A black journal with red lettering stitched on the cover. "If anything happens to me, please read this." He took a breath and opened it. The first page held just one sentence. "Gail, if you made it here, then there's still hope for you." Isabella's words, written in black ink and raw pain, cut through him like they were carved straight into bone. "If you made it here, then there's still hope for you." He stood frozen. The journal spread open on the rusted desk, Julianne's flashlight casting flickering shadows on the walls. The stench of mildew and old paper filled the room. But Gail didn't move. For the first time in years, Gail Montenegro felt something he couldn't name, not guilt, not rage. It was grief, the kind he'd never allowed himself to feel. He turned to the second page. Her handwriting was strong, slanted, almost architectural. "For months they made me believe I was crazy, that my screams had no sound, that my memory was broken. But I remembered the names, the faces, the cold rooms where they erased identities and wired dreams into children. I screamed your name, Gail, but only the echo answered me." He paused. Luna came closer. She stared at the journal as if hearing her mother's voice through the pages. She sat beside him, silent. And in that silence, there was more truth than any words could hold. He kept reading. "I know you grew up believing a different version of our story. I wanted to believe it too, that maybe it was all exaggerated, that our father was strict, but fair. But after what I saw, there was no going back. And the hardest part wasn't what they did. It was knowing the truth would separate me from everyone I loved, especially you. I never wanted to disappear, Gail. I was erased, inside and out." Gail's hands trembled. The next pages detailed the experiments, the doctors, the aliases of the children, the side effects of reprogramming. But what hurt the most wasn't the clinical horror. It was his absence. The absence of a brother, who in her eyes never came. Luna leaned her head gently on Gail's shoulder, a small gesture, almost shy. But in that moment something broke inside him, not in a destructive way. It broke like something old and hardened finally giving in, like a kind of pride that had kept him standing all these years, but no longer served him. "Do you think she forgave me?" he asked, voice hoarse. Luna didn't answer. She just held his arm tighter. Julianne stood at a distance, leaning against the wall. For the first time there was peace in his face, as if seeing that moment, uncle, niece and sister finally connected, meant more than vengeance or any kind of justice. "The world tried to erase what you had," he said softly. "But blood sometimes remembers." Gail slowly closed the journal and held it against his chest, like it was the last piece of Isabella he could still touch. "I want to get you out of here," he said. "All of you. Take you somewhere. Safe. Start over." Julianne gave a half smile. Starting over, that's what she's waited 27 years for. Outside, dawn had begun. A grey light crept through the sanatorium's hallways, softening the edges of every shadow. It was the first sunrise Gail had seen in years, without being trapped in a boardroom, a conference call, or a jet. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a waste. They left together in silence. Luna held her mother's red ribbon in one hand. Gail held the journal. There were no plans, no guarantees, but something new moved between them. Presence. The kind that's born only after the fall. In the car, Luna asked, "Are you going back to your old world?" Gail looked at her, then up at the sky, then into the mirror, where a weathered face stared back, one he barely recognized anymore. No, The old world died at the airport, she smiled. And that smile, it felt like a new name for everything. The city of Burgos slept under a quiet storm as Gail stepped into the golden hall of the hotel, hosting the Trans-Iberian Economic Forum. It was the same event where, months earlier, he would have been announced. As president of a European energy conglomerate, had the explosion not changed everything? Now, with Isabella alive, Julian in the shadows, and Luna hidden safely away, he entered through another door. Not as the mogul, but as a man who had finally uncovered what his family had hidden for decades. In his briefcase were more than contracts. It held digitized copies of Isabella's journal, fragments of Project Aurora's archives, secret recordings from meetings between corporate executives and politicians, everything Isabella and Julian had kept, waiting for the right moment. Proof that the Montenegro group, under a philanthropic mask, had funded psychological experiments on minors in the 1990s and early 2000s, exploiting emotional vulnerability in the name of a more efficient future. But this wasn't just about exposure. It was also about confronting his own name. The name Montenegro, which had opened doors for decades, now felt more like a shackle, and he was ready to break it, publicly. Inside the hall, live cameras tracked every move. Journalists, investors, and politicians sat in silence awaiting the keynote speaker. The man many called the last lion of European capitalism was about to speak. Gael stepped up to the podium. He ignored the prepared speech, the protocol, the anxious glances, and he looked straight into the main camera. My name is Gael Montenegro, and everything I built was founded on a lie. The silence was immediate. A glass shattered. An aide stood up. But no one dared interrupt. My family created empires, shaped markets, bought decisions, but it also created pain. Silenced voices, erased lives, and one of those voices was my sister, Isabella. He opened the briefcase, held up an enlarged photo of the journal. This journal is hers. For years she was declared dead. Today I tell the world she is alive, and that everything she wrote here, Heike, is true. Murmurs rippled through the room, but Gael went deeper. Project Aurora was real. It was funded by companies many of you still work with today. They used children as test subjects for behavioral control. They taught them that pain was education, that fear was discipline, that forgetting who you are was progress. Voices rose. Security approached. An executive tried to rush the stage, but was held back. The tension peaked. I should have died in that airport explosion, Gael said, his eyes steady. But a child saved me, a girl who was also a target of this network, and in her eyes, I saw the strength of someone born to uncover the truth. He paused. He knew this moment would end his career, maybe even cost him his freedom, but something inside him had died long ago, and now, finally, something new was being born. I'm turning over all this evidence to the press, to international human rights organizations, and as of this moment, I resign from every position I've ever held. The Montenegro Empire ends here. The room erupted, cameras shut down, but it was too late. Julian had activated alternate live streams. The truth was already out. As Gael stepped off the stage, chaos broke out. Aides shouted. Reporters chased him with questions, but he just walked, with the calm of a man who had already walked through fire. Outside, under the rain, a car waited. Luna was in the back seat, smiling, Julian at the wheel, and Isabella beside him, her eyes red but at peace. You did it, she whispered. Gael nodded. It's not over yet. But now it starts right, Luna said softly. They drove away without rushing, and behind them the world began to fall apart. But for the first time, it was so something better could be built. The beach was empty. The sea in San Sebastian whispered in shy, gentle waves, like it too was learning to breathe again after the storm. The sky, soft greys and pale pinks, made no promises, no threats. It just was a canvas hanging quietly above a life beginning to stitch itself back together. Gael walked barefoot on the wet sand, pant legs rolled up to his calves, Isabella's journal pressed to his chest. From a distance, Isabella watched, sitting on a blanket with Luna curled up asleep in her lap. Her daughter slept like someone who had finally found solid ground. Strands of hair covered half her face, but still, the resemblance was unmistakable. The eyes, the jawline, the beautiful, dense quiet she carried, like an unspoken inheritance. Gail stood at the water's edge, breathed in. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to run, or win, or conquer. Life wasn't a business expansion anymore, it was just life. And it was more than he had ever imagined. He turned, walked back to where Isabella sat. He lowered himself beside her without saying a word. The sound of the sea filled all, the space where words no longer needed to go. Luna shifted, wrapped her arms around her mother and sank back into sleep. "She dreams of the ocean," Isabella said, looking down at her, even when she didn't know what it was. "She used to say she could hear it in the corridors where we hid." "Maybe she was hearing what we were trying to forget," Gail replied, still facing the water. She smiled, a small smile, not of relief, not of sadness, just quiet recognition, as if saying, "You finally made it." "I read everything," Gail said, "every page, every silence between the lines. And I realized as I was so absent, I may have been complicit without knowing." "No," she said gently, shaking her head. "You were just a boy. They taught you how to survive. And you did. But now, you've chosen to live." Gail looked at Luna, then back to the sea. "I used to think living meant never failing, that if I slipped everything would collapse, so I chose control. But control became a prison." Isabella reached out and touched his shoulder. For the first time since they reunited, the gesture held no grief, no longing, just presence, brother and sister, two souls who no longer had to pretend to be whole. "What's going to happen to all of this?" she asked. "The press is moving forward. The international case has been launched. Companies are collapsing, names are being exposed. But the most important thing," Gail said, voice steady, "is that the name Montenegro will finally mean something else. There'll be retaliation. I know, and I'm ready." Isabella took a long breath, then reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. Small, thick, sealed with red wax, she handed it to him. The original journal. It never left Spain. I kept it hidden all these years. Now, it's yours. Gail took it with both hands. It wasn't just paper. It was weight, legacy, redemption. "And you? What will you do now?" he asked. Isabella looked toward the horizon. "I'm going to live, out loud, for the first time. No more hiding, Luna. No more hiding my name. And if they try to silence me again, they'll hear me over and over." He nodded slowly. "I want to be with you, not as a protector, not as a hero, just as your brother. And if she'll let me, as her uncle." Isabella smiled. "She already has." "Still half asleep," Luna murmured without opening her eyes. "I dreamed you weren't leaving anymore." Gail bit his lower lip. The emotion rose like the tide, but he didn't cry. Not this time. The pain wasn't a wound anymore. It was a root, and with roots, he could grow. Far off, a seagull cut across the sky. The tide crept in slowly, washing away the footprints they had left hours earlier, and there on that quiet beach forgotten by time, 3 people left the past where it belonged. Gail Montenegro would never be the same. And finally, that was everything he'd ever wanted. Thank you for staying until the end. But don't leave just yet. On the next screen is another powerful story. Tap to watch, subscribe to the channel, and share this journey with someone who needs it. I'll see you there.